Hello.
Hello. Perhaps we can start slowly while other people are joining. Thank you very much for your interest in this webinar. Welcome. My name is Dolores Romano. I'm a Deputy Policy Manager for Chemicals at AIB, and I'm coordinating this program on capacity building on preventing chemicals policies. So we are very happy that you are interested in transparency on chemicals and products. When we launched this program in September, we asked you and others which were the issues that you were most interested in learning about. And with a high difference, transparency on chemicals and products was scored the highest. So we thought, okay, let's start this thematic webinars of the project with the topic of most interest. And to talk about this topic, we have three women that know very much about it. We have, well, perhaps I should go through the agenda first, but we will have Elise Vitali, Natasha Dokowska, and Olga Sperenskaya. But I don't know, Alessia, can you share the, shall I share my screen then? Oh, okay, here you are. Okay, so we can start with the agenda for today. So first we will have three presentations on the topic, showing us the situation in the EU, in a low and medium income country, North Macedonia, and also a global initiative. And then we will have a panel discussion with the presenters, but also we would like to encourage you also to share your experiences or any, of course, ask any questions, but also share your campaign activities or experiences in your own countries. And we will finish with a short wrap up and telling you about the next steps. So to start, we have Elise Vitali. She is my colleague. She's a lawyer, environmental lawyer, and has been working has been working on transparency on chemicals and products already in Europe already for several years. And I don't know if there's anybody that knows more about this right now in the EU, so I'll leave you with her. And you have 20 minutes for this.
Thank you. Just for me, time to share my screen. Great. I'm just looking at the time so I know when I need to hurry up. Okay, it's 04. Okay, thanks. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My main task for me today will be to set the scenes for the further interventions later on, and for you to have a fruitful exchange afterwards during the exchange with the other NGOs. So I'll be introducing you to chemicals and products, transparency, and the right to know. It's quite a broad program, so I'll start without further ado. If my slides, yes, 1, 2. So a first thing to do when we want to talk about the issue of transparency is to define it. I will not use an official definition, but rather trying to narrow down the subject to what is relevant for us in this context today. When talking about transparency on chemicals and products, we are looking into access to information, of course, on the chemical content that is relevant to guarantee the safety from exposure to chemicals. So it's a definition with a proper aim, that is to guarantee safety. There are prior requirements for transparency to happen. Transparency on chemicals requires the information on the properties. It is the first basis. There needs to be a generation of the properties on the chemicals, whether it is properties based on their hazards, on the risks, on the exposure to these properties. So this is a first requirement. Transparency requires traceability, which is the ability to track the information from one supply chain to the other, or from one phase of the product to the other, from when it is manufactured to when it is being used, discarded, becoming waste, recycled, and then again entering an economy, hopefully the circular economy. The information must be available. So we mentioned this, it needs to be traceable, but it also needs to be available somewhere, and it needs to be accessible, because if we have traceability but no access to this information, or a very limited access to this information, transparency is not guaranteed. I have included here a drawing that we worked with a designer with to have, and this was the time when we were advocating for having a database on here the HVHCs. These are the substances of very high concern, so the most hazardous substances in the EU, and we were denouncing industry, claiming that it's always innovative, it can come up with great solutions and digital solutions. But when it comes to guaranteeing transparency thanks to digital solutions, it's always more difficult to have them on board, but not impossible. We'll see why later on. We also need to talk about the right to know and to define it. Again, this is not an official definition from a legislation, but it is the idea is to narrow, to define a bit the boundaries of our topic today. The right to know can be defined as the right of access to information, in our case, related to environmental hazards and precisely chemicals, exposure of chemicals in general. The right to know is guaranteed in the EU by a set of legislation, but the scope of the information may differ. In certain cases, you have a right to know on substances held by authorities, or in other times it is about, in our case, you have a right to know about the chemicals, the most hazardous chemicals that you may be exposed to when intending to buy a product. So the scope can be different, but here today we'll talk about the right to know in the EU legislation relating to chemicals. The right to know is extremely important, but I wanted to stress that it's not a formal prerequisite to transparency. You may have transparency, and we'll see this later on with a set of legislation which do not formally guarantee a right to know, but because the information is available and trackable at one moment, you have a form of transparency there, but you don't need to have an explicit reference to it in a text to call for transparency. Yes. So when discussing transparency on chemicals in products, there are a few questions that we need to ask, like journalists, when they ask whom, what, when, where. It is the same for transparency. There are sets of things to set on the table, and we've been through this process when conducting our campaign for transparency on chemicals in products in the EU. You first have to define the actors involved. So the actors are notably the duty holders. So you have to wonder who is obliged in this case. Is this the manufacturer, the producer, companies in general, or the supplier, the importer? So there are sets of words which refer to a specific reality of actors in the supply chain. There are some that are broader than others. For instance, the importer would be more, let's say, responsible for the limited than having the suppliers, and this type of consideration are very important to achieve transparency. Whom the access is granted to is also a core element. So whether the provisions grant access to authorities only, or to certain companies or the industry specifically, or which is our preference, the public in general. The subject, so meaning the chemicals or their properties being targeted. This is a core issue to define what you want transparency on, whether it is based on the hazardous properties, whether it is based on a family of chemicals or chemicals regulated under international conventions. This is also a core question to solve before going further. Of course, these chemicals must be put in a context, and so it is the where. In our case today, it will be products, and I'm adding quotation mark here because in the EU we would refer to mixtures and articles, but I will use the more neutral term of products to make sure that we all understand each other. The concentrations or the thresholds that might be apprehended or not are a very important issue. So if you have an article, you want transparency only on the content above 0.1% weight per weight. That could be an example. This is the case in certain legislations in the EU. Or whether there are thresholds, you have transparency only on 50% of the content of the product. So there are also ways to play with this cursor when it comes to the concentrations and what is apprehended. Another question is whether these substances are intentional or not. And if the substances apprehended are non-intentional, you're broadening the scope even further. And of course, that's very important when you know that you have residues of pesticides or very hazardous substances in our everyday products, which are apparently not intentionally added or present. So that's also a core issue. The format of the information or the format of the access, whether you have access to this information via written procedures. So if you need to send an email, a letter to an authority or to a company to have this information, whether it is via digital means, whether you access a database or whether you have access to it via digital apps, and whether the information is readily available on a database or an app or any other support, or whether it is only available upon request. So that's also very, very important. In the EU, for instance, under the chemicals regulation, you have a problematic 45 days delay after which you make the request to receive an answer. And of course, this is not ideal in our digital lives today in a way, although the digital life, I could talk about it forever, but I'll focus on this topic now. Finally, the aim of the provision is also important. So when implementing transparency, authorities, decision makers have the choice to either promote circularity, safety of the circularity, or the sorting of the materials, or in our case in the EU, in the legislations, is most of the time to guarantee safety of the use of the article or of the substance. So these are the things to bear in mind for the conversations that we'll have today, because depending on each answer to this question or each depending on the approach to each of these points, the scope of the transparency will be different. So here, I think my colleagues from the communications team would really not be happy with such a slide, and I'm sorry for the presentation, but here the important, I think, is the content. So it is an overview of certain EU legislations and what they're doing to guarantee access to information. And I'm being cautious not to use transparency because it depends on the legislation. So the first one, and this is our flagship legislation, the REACH regulation on chemicals, provides requirements to register and to notify substances to the EU Chemicals Agency. So there is a registration database, and there is also a more recent database, which is called SKIP, for Substances of Concern in Products database. So you have information on the chemicals in here thanks to the REACH regulation. How this is being implemented, or the means for this to happen, as I mentioned, there is an obligation to notify, but there is also, interestingly, a right to know on the substances of very high concern in quotation mark products. This right to know is here, and this is a very important added value of this legislation. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll see that, for instance, for the mixtures or other sets of legislations, it is not as clearly mentioned or dedicated into the core text, but still we have information on the chemicals. So for the mixtures, so we have a specific regulation, the classification, labeling and packaging, CLP regulation. In here, there is a requirement to have a notification to poison centers to maintain an inventory. So that's sort of setting the requirements. And then there are different sets of guarantees or means depending on the actors. So for the public, there is a requirement to label and package the classified substances and mixtures. For workers and companies, we have the form of a document, which is the safety data sheet, but basically it's a document compiling the information on certain chemicals included in the article. For authorities, there is a requirement to receive the notification to poison centers. So they get to have transparent information thanks to this notification. I'm simplifying a bit the picture, but I think the important is the different ways in which this is being implemented. For the cosmetics regulation, there is a requirement to notify to the EU Commission and a cosmetics ingredient database. So this database is not necessarily about having a full transparency, but in a way rather about having the proper names of the chemicals that are on the market. But still, there is transparency under the cosmetics regulation thanks to an ingredient listing on the packaging or on the labeling. I will give you an example of these packages, but we wanted to confront these initiatives and measures to the articles case. And for the articles, because we have complex supply chains, global ones, we have in a way more complexity. The situation of the articles and the transparency on chemicals and articles in products is still to be fully defined and worked on, and this is what we are doing. Here are the labels. So again, sorry for the presentation, but at least you have an idea. So here you have a cosmetic. Here you have a mixture, and so you have the composition with the percentage here in different languages. Some of the labels are in French. I just took them, took the pictures from my house. Here is a black soap on the right, and you also have the warning label. So this was just to give you quick examples. But getting back to the situation of articles and transparency on articles, we have made concrete demands to improve the situation in the EU. And we thought this could be relevant for you to be aware at this stage. So we are proposing a stepwise approach for traceability and transparency. So by 2020, we wanted to have traceability on the substances of very high concern. It's a list of the most hazardous substances in the EU which are identified, but they were not necessarily traceable. until the creation of the SKIP database, which I mentioned earlier. We can discuss about it a bit further later on. By 2025, we are still calling for the traceability for substances of concern. And for that, we really mean a broad definition of substances of concern to have a preventive approach and make sure that they are not identified later on and added to the products at one certain moment when they are not yet regulated. By 2030, and this is our highlight demand, it is which is to have full material declaration. So we want to know or be able to track actually the whole composition of materials or products on the market. There are considerations which I mentioned here. I will only mention one for the sake of timing, but when we ask for full material declarations, we are aware that certain companies may claim the confidentiality of information. We are very much insisting on the fact that confidentiality can never be claimed on hazardous or risky substances or substances of concern in this case. There could be a margin to have traceability, but not necessarily disclosure of the information. 5% of the composition can remain secret as long as there are guarantees that it does not concern hazardous substances. So these are the nuances in our demands and things to be considered. I'm not aware of the timing. I have a few slides more. So in terms of the key developments in the EU, and I think some of them are interesting because they can be accessible from wherever you are. So the SKIP database, the first one, so it's the database I mentioned earlier on substances of concern in products, which stands for SKIP in this case. It is operated by the European Chemicals Agency. It is live since September 2021. There are a lot of things to improve on this tool, and we're hoping that they will be improved to guarantee better access. But what's very interesting is that this database was introduced under the waste legislation and not under the chemicals legislation, which was also a bit of a surprise, including for us at the time. So that's an interesting development. Another interesting development is the proposal to have a products passport. And in there, of course, NGOs, including us, are calling for information on chemicals to be included in order to have transparency. The products passport would contain information on information relevant to the sustainability performance of the article. So making sure that you know what are the materials, you have a traceability on whether employment to manufacture the product was complying with legal requirements, etc. So that's still at the stage of a proposal, but it's a very interesting development when it comes to transparency. And finally, the EEB is a partner to the Ask Rich project, which has developed an app, Scan4Chem, to implement the right to know. And thanks to this app, you can scan products to make requests to companies to know or to ask about whether you have substances of very high concern in products. So this is thanks to EU legislation that this can be implemented, but it's a concrete aspect, which is, of course, I think very important and interesting. So how to get there, how to get to transparency and implementation of the right to know. We need to join our forces. We're working at EU level, but because of the global aspect of the supply chains, we need a global obligation. No separate entity can do this on their own. It would be very difficult for a regional actor to have a full transparency without the global chains being involved into this in one way or the other. We need a system to collect and handle information. here again, a global tool would be best placed to ensure this transparency throughout the supply chain. So a system, whether it is a database, whether it is a sets of obligation and legislation that provides this system, this is a requirement for this to be achieved. And the information must be available throughout the life cycle of the product. If the information is available only at the beginning, whether it is the manufacture, the production, the design, but not at the waste stage, if it's lost in between, we lose the main benefits that we would have from this traceability, which are an access or an implementation of the right to know, better traceability, risk assessment and management, safe and sustainable products. All these added values here are in a way linked one to the other, and one cannot happen without the other. So this would be my concluding slide as to what should we do. And I think the exercise of discussing and exchanging today is a first step, of course, within this forum, the small forum. What we have experienced is that it is extremely useful to work in networks. This is a no-brainer, and I think you've most probably also experienced this in the past. But in our case, it was interesting to work with people working on waste, on plastics, but of course chemicals, because this is our issue. Working with these networks made us realize the opportunities from other policies. I know that there's a lot of interest into circular economy issues, and basically a circular economy cannot be realized without the safety of the materials. And of course, that requires transparency and traceability. So that's the interlinks I just mentioned a few seconds ago. That would result into creating joint materials, leaflets, letters, apps with a broader scope. So having benefits for the waste sector, for the plastics, chemicals, or many other things that I'm not even thinking of right now and that you might be aware of. And finally, we realized that some of our demands are ambitious, precisely when it comes to the full material declarations, but they're straightforward. We don't need to have specific calculations to understand where we are aiming. We are aiming to transparency on the products that we use on a daily basis. And this requires proper campaigns. This requires us to, of course, be united with our networks, as I mentioned. And there is also an unusual suspect, at least this was the case for us. It was to include companies. Some companies already have solutions, or they're working on solutions to track the substances, or some have been working with consortiums that are pushing for this type of tools. Some industries or companies have understood that they have all interests in pushing for this to happen. And we have learned the lesson that at some point it's important to also showcase these good examples to decision makers, which seem sometimes more interested when they hear that companies can do what we are asking for, and they realize that it's not so much of a crazy idea to call for transparency. So that would be a small tip from the experience that we have. I will stop here. I'm sorry I didn't see the time, so I hope I'm not running over too much, and looking forward to exchange with you on the topic.
Thank you very much, Liz. No, you didn't run too much over that time. I believe you will share later some resources of the work that the NGOs have been doing on this, but we can talk about that later. So perhaps we can go now to the next presentation, which is from Natasha Dokowska. Natasha is Program Director and Journalist for Human Rights in North Macedonia, and she is going to tell us a bit about their work on increasing transparency in chemicals in North Macedonia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dolores. Hi from Skopje. As she say, as Dolores say, I'm coming from Journalists for Human Rights. This is the NGO based in North Macedonia that work since 1996, but we have been working on this topic for many years, and unfortunately there is no any progress. Just to illustrate the process of harmonization of Macedonian legislation with that of the European Union, I can say that chapter 27, that it's connected to the environment, it's not yet work on the chemicals. We have been working on this topic as an organization since 2008, thanks to a project that we received together with the WCF. And since that time, we started to work on the chemical safety on the children toys. And the first question was why we start to work with the toys. I can shortly say that we start to work on the toys starting from the evaluation criteria, because the toy should stimulate the imagination rather than destroy it. Through the game, the child gets to know himself, the environment, the experience, and from an early age they became attached and identify with the toy. And the more different options the toy offer, the more it stimulates play, and the child want to stay with it longer, which means that they must be safety to play and to be along with them. When we detect or when we realize all of this, we start to see how is the regulation in our country regarding the safety, product safety. We have the law on product safety that it's date from 2006 with the latest amendment in 2018, and also the rule book on toy safety from 2010. In meantime, our country work and start to harmonize some of the EU directive and the law that we have as EU standards that are contained in the directives, which means that we have Directive 71 for the mechanical and physical property, flammability property, migration, and 13 element directive on setting up chemical experiment and similar operation, toy for chemical activity not included in experimental kits, graphic symbol, the caution attention, color that can be printed with fingers, the duration 78.8 that say that toy for indoor use, slide and similar toy for indoor and outdoor use, which means that we have almost incorporate almost all these directives, but almost no one of them are implemented regularly. I will say how is the situation with the toy production in our country, that we don't have any production of toys. 13 companies are registered for import of toys, but 5 are newly registered less than 3 years ago, which means before the COVID situation. And only 3 companies import the 20 world-renowned toy brands that meet European standards for toy safety. Why I mention this? I mention this because in our country, almost all toys that they are coming from the, or not all, but more than 90%, they are coming from the Asian market, and the problem is with this toy that they are coming illegally or that they illegally enter in the country. All these toy we can find it on the open market, on the streets, or on the shops, but without any labels, without any information about the the ingredient inside or any information about of importer. These toys that they don't have a certificate issued by the State Sanitary and Health Inspectorate, which is important to have it. Which means that we are really far away from the EU law and the EU safety of the products. Also, in our country, the rapid alert system, which enable the rapid exchange of information between 31 European countries and European Commissions on dangerous no-food products that pose a risk to the health and safety consumer. It's not running, which means that even that the inspectorate and the state health and sanitary inspectorate is in a contact with this, they doesn't publish the information and then doesn't follow the measures or the actions that are proposed by this RAPEX list. Unfortunately, we can find almost a lot of products that are banned in European Union that you can buy it in almost each shops in North Macedonia. Labels on toys, I can say that in order to reduce the risk of using toys related to safety and health, those must be accompanied by appropriate, clearly visibly warning and written warning. According to the rulebook of the Republic of North Macedonia, every toy that is on the market or will be released in store must contain a declaration that contains information that is true, clearly visible and legible, written in Macedonian and Cyrillic alphabet. Besides the Macedonian language, it also posts that the declaration is in other language to be easily understanding for the consumer. But unfortunately, almost everything that is right on the rule books, we cannot find it on the labels. On the labels on toys, I will here show you how it looks. That it's very the format, it's very small, you cannot read it. Also, there it's not the appropriate information. It's only right who is the importer, who is the exporter, and what is the name of the toys. Also, for the data of the declaration on the imported products, the responsibility according to our law is on the importer. In our work with the importers or with the sellers, we always receive the information that this is very expensive for them to translate, to print, and to add to each product, and this is why we cannot find it. Also, the big problem is that we cannot even find the information about the C-label, and very often this is the false information, or that it's not adequate with the game that it's contained. Very often this is the Chinese products that they contain this label. The responsibility it's to few of the ministry and state institution, because this is the cross-sectoral, because this topic is a cross-sectoral cooperation, and the cooperation very often is very limited because the Ministry of Economy, Health, Labor and Social Policy doesn't cooperate on the real way. In addition, the Agency for Occupational Medicine and the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Water Economy and Ministry of Environment and Physical Planning play a big role in this topic, but unfortunately they doesn't cooperate, and we don't have real access to the information related to transparency of the product. I want to say that the toys, they are not only the products in which we work. We also work on the transparency of the products like menstrual pads and pampers. And this is the big problem because especially now during the COVID crisis, during the COVID crisis, you can find it to buy it in the bulk without any labels, that we doesn't know what we buy, but they are cheaper, and of course the people they are buy. Also, the big problems stand to be the sex toys or the toys for the adults, because according to the research from the Institute of Public Health in Macedonia, we have a lot of these products imported from Asia, that they are according the measurement or the research, that they are full with the phthalates, the chemicals that it's banned for use as in the product as children's toys and pacifiers. And also in the face of the COVID crisis, the cleaning products, we are aware that have been flying off the shelf and in our home. While the protection from coronavirus is a primary concern, consumers also need to know what they use, but in our shops, in the pharmacy, you can find a lot of products for cleaning products without any transparency, without any labels. This is because everything they sold without any marking. Online sale is the big problem now, because they have contributed to the market offering untested products because no one has reviewed it. Also, the citizens doesn't know how to read and understand the sign, and in the school, in the kindergarten, they buy the cheapest and the lowest quality product for cleaning, because they usually buy per kilo, produced in our country with any document for the safety of the products. And all of this, they saw us that we need, first of all, harmonization of the legislation with the EU, because, as I say, we have almost everything, but the implementation is very low. Also, it's very important to educate the importer and seller of related products, growing awareness about the risk of chemical on products, and educated citizens to understand the chemical language, which means that they are going and buy some products they didn't understand what it means, some sign related to the chemicals in the products. Thank you very much. I have this for today.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for showing us the situation in North Macedonia. I see that there are already some questions in that chat, but let's go now with the presentation from, let's hear the presentation from Olga Speranskaya, sorry, Olga. And then we will have a panel discussion and answer all these questions. Olga is co-director of Health and Environment Justice Support, who is an NGO that is working on chemicals and transparency on chemicals and products at the international level. Olga has participated in many international expert groups on this, and she will tell us about the situation right now and at the global level. So thank you very much, both Natasha and Olga, for your time.
Thank you very much, Dolores. I'm wondering if Alex or yeah, okay, thank you so much. Because I have some technical issues that I cannot share. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Elise and Natasha, for the presentations. And actually, they cover a lot, but I will try to briefly tell you about the global initiatives under SAICM chemicals in products. And like to better understand why this is a global issue, I want to say that there are more than 350,000 chemicals on the market, and including chemicals of concern. And these chemicals can be released at any stage of the product life cycle, and also they are found in consumer products, as we heard, all over the world, which results in the exposure of workers, of consumers, with an emphasis of women and children, waste operators, and the environment. And only a few hazardous chemicals are regulated regionally, and even fewer chemicals are regulated globally, as you see on this slide, by 4 chemical conventions. However, stakeholders know very, very little about what chemicals are in products, and thus they cannot adequately protect themselves from exposure. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of history. So back in 2009, at the second session of the International Conference on Chemicals Management, or ICCM, an attempt was made to address the problem of disclosing what chemicals are in products. And the conference adopted chemicals in products as a SAICM issue of concern. And 3 years later, ICCM 3 decided to develop a chemical in products program to assist all stakeholders throughout the product life cycle, within and outside the supply chain, seeking effective ways to exchange information on chemicals in products. So in 2015, finally, ICCM 4 adopted the CIP program, Chemicals in Products program, and the guidance on exchanging chemicals and products information, with the goal to help stakeholders get better access to information they need to make decisions and take actions on chemical hazards and exposure, risk, and management. And next slide, please. So the products covered by the CIP program are only manufactured products or articles, and they do not, the program does not cover cleaning or personal hygienic products or cosmetics. So the focus within SAICM was made on chemicals in toys, building materials, electronics, and textiles. And next slide, please. So the CIP program includes a broad scope of chemicals with hazardous properties, which are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. And next slide, please. And here are some examples of such chemicals in products, which include like persistent organic pollutants from recycled plastic, or PFAS in textiles, or asbestos in building materials, or mercury in lighting, flame retardants in installation, and others. And next slide, please. So the idea of establishing the CIP program was supposed to be good, but something went really wrong, as nor governments nor companies were in a hurry to endorse the program. And no visible improvements on information disclosure were achieved. And in 2015, SAICM independent evaluator revealed obvious problems with all SAICM issues of concern, including the Chemicals in Products program. For example, SAICM issues of concern are not high on political agenda, including chemicals in products, and advances are mainly limited to information collection. So we all know that scientists in different countries frequently reveal numerous toxic chemicals in toys and other consumer products, but not much is being done to get rid of these chemicals and ensure that toys are safe to play. And also there are just a few concrete risk elimination or risk reduction measures, and some of them are listed here. For example, if we take the Stockholm Convention, it regulates like 30 chemicals, but made a transparency decision to label just one chemical, which is HBCD, in new building installation, right? So next slide, please. Yeah, so it becomes evident that the implementation of the CIP program faces just many challenges. And the biggest challenge is that most companies do not publicly disclose information on chemicals in products and even on hazardous chemicals and their potential adverse health effects, claiming this information as confidential. And another challenge is non-harmonized rules of information exchange. For example, like voluntary transparency schemes from industry are usually limited to the transparency for within supply chain stakeholders, which is very narrow. And it is definitely an obstacle to sound life cycle management of materials and products. And also, like voluntary transparency schemes by industry results in multiple parallel standards, and complying with these standards can be really challenging for small and medium-sized companies. And it is also challenging for the governments to verify and control industry claims, and particularly developing and transition economies lack the technical and financial capacity needed to verify industry claims. And also, as Natasha already mentioned, the majority of countries have no control over products sold online. And in fact, this internet trade is really growing. And but even in the European Union, where control is supposed to be better, just I believe it was yesterday that ECHA's enforcement authorities found that most inspected products sold online were not compliant with the EU, with the relevant EU chemical legislation. And of course, as Natasha already said, so the information on consumer product labels and websites typically contains incomplete or like vague or even inaccurate, sometimes inaccurate information about chemicals present in the products. And for example, if you take textiles, you practically just, it's a challenge for consumers to find any information about, like, for example, PFAS presence in the products, or pesticides presence in the cotton products. So it's really a challenge. I doubt you will be able to find this in the like obvious, I mean, in the everyday products, either in stores or online. And next slide, please. Yeah, so additional challenging happening as a result of such non-harmonized rules of information exchange are presented on this slide. But I would like to specifically mention that some jurisdictions, mainly developed countries in transition, they lack regulations on many chemicals of concern, meaning that there are no reporting thresholds or transparency requirements. And as a result, markets in such countries are physically flooded with products containing toxic chemicals, as we now call it, like double standards. And next slide, please. So to improve the implementation of SAICM issues of concern, a group of NGOs suggested criteria or triggers that will help to evaluate the progress of implementation of each issue of concern, including the chemicals in products, and decide if the responsibilities of stakeholders should be elevated to the next level of obligations that will lead to concrete risk reduction activities for each issue of concern. And the link to the triggers developed by a group of NGOs is presented on this slide. And if the slides, I do not know if the slides are supposed to be disseminated, or if not, we can later put these links to the chat. But also there is a link to the case study on how these triggers can be applied for chemicals in products and what increased obligations can be considered. So a suggestion that he support SSNC and Groundworks South Africa is to develop a global minimum transparency standard for hazardous chemicals in products as a tool for companies to disclose information along the whole supply, the whole product life cycle. And this will help achieve equal access to information for all stakeholders, and irrespective of country and within and outside the supply chain. And this standard, the global minimum transparency standard, to our understanding, it is a step towards stricter regulation or even complete phase out of hazardous chemicals from products. And the next slide, please. Yeah, so we believe that having a globally harmonized transparency standard for hazardous chemicals in products has clear advantages, because it puts in place conditions for disclosing information about toxic chemicals inside and outside the supply chain for materials and for products. And it helps eliminate double standards and address the challenges with internet trades. And of course, it is a step towards progressive ban of hazardous chemicals in products, and because it inspires innovation and like safe product design and reuse and recycling. And the next slide, please. So we believe that ideally the GMTS should improve access to information on all chemicals in products. But we also suggest starting with chemicals already regulated globally and regionally, because there is no reasonable argument against disclosing these chemicals in products. And even industry confidentiality claims will not be appropriate, as these chemicals are already recognized as substances of very high concern. And next slide, please. So we think that, of course, the global minimum transparency standard should ideally be binding from the beginning, but also like a combination of voluntary and binding elements can be considered, as suggested on this slide. So like we continue the work with voluntary disclosure of chemicals in materials and in products via the Chemicals in Products program, which is a voluntary program, right? But also consider two types of increased disclosure obligations for substances of concern, like, for example, mandatory disclosure of chemical identity and concentration, and like restrictions or bans of these chemicals in products. And next slide, please. So, of course, the idea of a globally harmonized minimum transparency standard requires a lot of like brainstorming and a lot of discussions. The options for discussion could include, for example, should it be like a standard based on chemical by chemical approach? Or should there be a standard based on chemical family approach? And I should say that, for example, under the Stockholm Convention, slowly, but parties to the Stockholm Convention are moving to the chemical class approach rather than chemical by chemical approach. And this is, for example, is very relevant to PFAS chemicals, right? So also another option for discussion is, should it be one standard for all substances of very high concern? and also whether the disclosure should be like in the electronic labels or physical labels or reported to public database, like Alice mentioned earlier today, similar to SIP database that is hosted by ECHA, but a public global database for substances of very high concern could be hosted by the International Organization of Management of Chemicals, for example, by UNEP. The next slide, please. So regarding the NGO demands that we could definitely discuss, change, and whatever, we think that it is very important to support the approach of a global minimum transparency standard. And we will be very, very happy to continue the discussion with all of you and see if some of your organizations are willing to be part of the advocacy campaigns, advocacy groups to discuss this approach more with your governments and like relevant authorities. Also, we believe that information of chemicals relating to the health and safety to humans should never be confidential. And this is explicitly highlighted in the SAICM overarching policy strategy and in SAICM chemicals and products program. So this is not something new, it's already approved by countries. And of course, we also believe that the SAICM criteria for identifying chemicals for disclosure should be applied because these criteria are based on hazardous properties of chemicals. And as I said, so of course, ideally there should be disclosure for all chemicals, substances of very high concern regarding of whether they are already regulated or not regulated. And definitely there should be sufficient financing based on the internalization of cost and polluter-pays principle to ensure that products are safe and to support the initiatives which are already underway. And also we were thinking like of suggesting like the use of economic instruments to encourage information disclosure. For example, a non-disclosure tax on companies that do not participate in the chemicals and products program, or companies that do not accept a global minimum transparency standard approach, because you know, like they should pay for choosing not to disclose what they produce and what they use. Also, we believe that the role of NGOs should be elevated because based on what Elise said today and what Natasha said today, NGOs are doing a lot. And people who are present today at the call, I'm sure they can have like numerous examples of NGO campaigns to identify toxic chemicals in products. So our data should be considered when the international or national policy relevant to chemicals and products is developed. And of course, the need for harmonized labels is very important, and what Natasha also mentioned, because we cannot like allow when different countries have different labels and different requirements for labels, and these requirements are so meaningless that people cannot get information they are looking for, cannot get information about hazardous chemicals in products they buy for themselves, for their children, and so on. And of course, we will continue to suggest everyone like we would like to be part of global campaigns and awareness raising campaigns on the importance of knowing what chemicals are in products throughout the whole product life cycle. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say. And thank you very much. And here are our contacts. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Olga, for this very clear presentation. Well, thank you to the three of you. So perhaps we can open the floor for questions, and it would be great if you could present yourself and when you take the floor. I really wanted to thank the colleagues that are joining from Chile and from Vietnam, because it's extremely early in Chile and extremely late in Vietnam. So thank you very much. So I don't see if anybody is asking for the floor right now. Oh, Elise, go ahead.
I wouldn't want to take people's space, but this is actually a reaction to a comment in the chat about the distinction between chemicals in products or chemicals in mixtures and substances. And indeed, this is also one of the core considerations. So when we approach the issue, we can look into the substances and the mixtures. We already have a good set of legislation, at least I'm talking about the EU, of course. We have a good set of legislation there, and the whole issue will be when we talk about the articles. And this is where we have this, the wording is dissonant, because the articles are, in this case, would be equivalent to the products. And we make this unofficial distinction between the solid products to which we want to have access on. And this, I think, was made clear also by Olga, the fact that there is a type of product where we would want this information on the textiles or the consumer products in a way. And there are some measures already for the detergents, for the chemicals, at least in the EU. So that's the distinction to make, but I want to insist that really one cannot happen without the other. If we do not have the information on the chemicals in the first place and the transparency on them, it will be difficult. I wouldn't think it would be possible to then have the information on the products, to use this semantic, because again, it's a matter of having the information throughout the whole supply chain. So it's important to dissociate the context, the concept, sorry, but one cannot go without the other also.
Okay. Thank you, Elise. So here, Ahmad, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to Olga, really, for a very good presentation. I don't know how wide we want to really consider when we talk about the chemical in products. It could be very wide concept. Myself, as you may, some of you may know me, I'm most concerned about the highly hazardous pesticides and pesticide issues. That is a very important issue. And also about all these talkings about who is going to be exposed to this and to what. We always should consider also the possibility of metabolites and mixtures. In the case of mixtures and metabolites, every compound, they break down in metabolites that sometimes are more toxic than the main compound. These are, and I hope that under SAICM we can get really clear that when we say chemical in products, really what we mean. Because for the past, decades, 5, 6, 7 decades, we were talking, myself, maybe 4 or 5 decades, about the chemical exposure, pesticide exposure, but a nice, very good separation Olga at first gave that what we mean for the chemical in products. And that was very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmad. Do any of you want to react to Ahmad's intervention?
I may say that regarding highly hazardous pesticides, so highly hazardous pesticides are regulated in many countries. I mean, pesticides in general, right? So they are regulated differently. and also the enforcement is very low in the majority of developing countries in transition. But regarding pesticides in products, for example, if we are talking about cotton and textiles made of cotton, right? You know, cotton consumes a lot of pesticides, and the residuals may still be in products, right? And in addition to this, when we buy, for example, products that say, I'm sorry, that do not, well, they do not shrink or do not stink or something like that, it means that pesticides are added there. This is weird, you know. In addition to like cotton production and the use of cotton in the textile, additional chemicals are added to make the product look nicer, right? And as you said, Ahmad, so the combination, nobody considers the combination of these toxic chemicals. And when people start wearing something and when they have allergy, who will make a connection between their allergic reaction, right, and the toxic chemicals in the clothes that they wear? Yeah, of course, specialists can make this connection, but ordinary people, it's a problem because you cannot find on the product label that specific pesticides were applied to make the product less, like, I don't know, whatever, shrinking or something like that. Or, you know, so this is the result of the lack of information. The lack of information like is directly linked to people's health. This is it. So we're not asking like, give us this information just for no reason. There is a direct reason. We want to protect our health. We want to protect the health of our children. This is why we need to know. And the mixture is a serious, very serious problem. I totally agree with you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you. Also, the one more concept that I remember to just mention here is the whole cup concept that we were following it some years ago. It's about the whole amount of you know, dosage or that you get from the breakfast in the cheese and egg. Later you come out from air, and then at noon, the whole day, you know, is called whole cup, that we are exposed to many different type of chemicals. So, and that's another concept that is very important. Thank you.
I would like to add that in the EU for pesticides, there is a list of authorized pesticides that can be used in the EU, and this is public, this list, and you can access. Perhaps we can share later the web page where you can find this list, and you can find the risk assessment behind each of these chemicals that have been authorized. I believe you can also see the list of non-authorized pesticides.
Well, thank you very much, Dolores. I have been, you know, in contact and following for 2 decades, the ECA. I am participating in Helsinki also. I'm aware about those, you know, all the rich concepts and regulations, and I've been following that, you know, carefully. And thank you very much.
Well, then perhaps I can ask you. I want to ask the others. This limited experience we have in the EU, because we do not have full transparency. We would like to really know the chemicals that are in our products, but the limited experience we have and the tools we have, how could they be useful for you? We have a database on chemicals that are registered. There you can find 22,000 chemicals with some information on hazards and some information on uses. we now have a growing database on chemicals, substance of very high concern in chemicals, in articles, the SCIP database. Then we have the obligation to know all the ingredients in cosmetics. And I mean, if this is produced in Europe, it should. So all these tools, how can they be useful for you? Cecilia, well, please go ahead.
I think if possible to have, and I know it's very difficult to do, but to see if the information can be stratified in terms of what would be easy for like people with home testing kits and citizen science to mobilize that, because I think at least in Kenya's case, there's a limited number of testing labs and testing facilities. And so that also slows down the identification process. But if there's simple tests that one can do at home with, you know, simple reactions, then to start mobilizing citizen scientists to get on this, I think that would be helpful.
Ahmad, you have the floor again.
Thank you very much, Dolores. As Olga also mentioned, and I was also talking about for decades, and we are also discussing about it in other, discussion that we have, and Olga is there also. We have big problems of enforcement in developing countries, and as you yourself said, Dolores, about the EU, and I'm in connection to them, but we need more help here I'm trying to be concentrated on the MENA countries, Middle East and North Africa. And I always asked ECA really to help for better regulations here in these countries. We have big problems really. In fact, another group are starting and that we discuss about the pesticide regulations globally, and that's a good group that is forming now. And I recommended that we be concentrated on the developing countries, because really in the developed world we do not have so much problem with regulation. It is good. It is so and good especially in Europe. And I was in US and Canada. I know that they are also not bad, but they are after Europe and Australia. But in developing countries, the problem is here. And we have to put more concentration really on, especially as Olga said, enforcement. We have rules and regulations written here everywhere in all these countries. But when it comes to enforcement, it's nothing. It is not enforced. Thank you.
Yes, I'm afraid the issue of enforcement is common in all our regions, also in the EU. But Olga wanted to talk, and I'll come back later regarding Cecilia's intervention.
Oh, okay. Just briefly to reflect what you said, Dolores. So I think that such initiatives like the list of substances of very high concern, it is a living list, right? So the REACH regulation as it is, as well as the SEEP database and all the work ECA is doing, it's a great role model. And developing countries really would love to follow, as well as countries in transition. But what we said, like lack of enforcement and lack of capacity, technical capacity, and lack of financing is these are like initial obstacles. But I also would like to say that what we would like to see from the EU is to eliminate the double standards completely. And this is what is said by the EU chemical strategy, which is great. absolutely great, but now it has to be implemented in practice. So no double standards. What it means no export of chemicals which are banned or restricted in the EU to any of developing or transition economies for any reason. Just stop it and just ban it. Because otherwise it will continue, and these countries, I mean developing and transitional countries, cannot manage these chemicals. They will end up in landfills, they will continue poisoning the whole world, the food system, everything, and that will return back to the EU in products, in food products, in consumer products. So let's stop it altogether. And this is where NGOs could definitely play the role, and like internationally, but of course with emphasis on the EU and the implementation of the chemical strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, this was one of our main asks for the chemical strategy when this was being discussed 2 years ago for the EEB and for our members and our colleagues working on chemicals. This was one of our main demands, and we were able to include it in the new strategy for chemicals for sustainability. And now it's one of the main topics for us to ensure that this is implemented. So yes, this is something we could work together, and perhaps through this program we can see how we can coordinate joint asks. And I just wanted to react to Cecilia's intervention idea. On tests, I don't know the answer for simple tests, but we did at the EU, the different NGOs did a very simple test some weeks ago, because one of the colleagues in Sweden said, the Body Shop, I don't know if you know this brand. This is a brand that says that they are known to sell like more safer cosmetics. And then they said that they had committed to ban PFAS, and they found that there were PFAS in one of their products. And in only 2 or 3 days, we saw NGOs from all over Europe going to the stores, looking at the Body Shop products, reading the labels, and like doing this inspection work that the and coming back to the Body Shop saying, okay, look, you're still selling cosmetic with PFAS all around Europe. So I don't know if this could be called a citizen science, but I think we can do more to check that the products that are said to be safe in US or in the Europe or in wherever in Kenya, we can check them also here. I don't know, this kind of activities. And well, Andreas has been waiting, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Dolores. My name is Andreas. I'm from the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. So I just want to go back to Dolores' question about how we can use the initiatives that we have, for example, in the European Union. And I'm thinking specifically of the substances of very high concern list. These chemicals have been identified using the same hazard property criteria as are in the SAICM criteria for the Chemicals in Products program. So as I see it, the chemicals in, or the substances of very high concern list it's the EU way of implementing the Chemicals in Products program. So actually there is no need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, these chemicals have been identified using the same criteria as in the Chemicals in Products program. So they could be safely adopted by any country who is dedicated to implementing the Chemicals in Products program. And this is also why we suggest to include the chemicals or the substances of very high concern in the global minimum transparency standard that Olga presented. So this is my message. So I mean, this is already something that we can adopt already now, because any country that are dedicated, as I said, to the Chemicals in Products program should also be able to use this list of of substances of very high concern directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Perhaps we could share also the link to this list. This list is under a list created under the REACH regulation, and it's updated each year, each 2 years. So this is a resource that perhaps you could be using. So we will share the list. So we are running out of time. Perhaps we can go to the slides, Alessia, with the next steps. So
yes, sir, it's coming.
no worries. No, I should have. Okay. So I see in the chat that Jasminka is saying that they have already asked the inspection to withdraw the, I think it's the body shop. You want to tell something about that, Jasminka, before? Okay.
Yes, of course. We received this information about the problem with it's a foundation, the cosmetic products posted on the face. It's a withdrawn product. So we identify this product on the Serbian market in different shops, but also including its offering of the online sales. So we prepared, we checked this ban, and we have it also in our national regulations. So it is, we decided to send the request to be withdrawn from our market, and now we will see how it's going on, because first they have to check the concentration of these substances in the cosmetic products, because it is the and from the other aspect, it is needed to be checked the date of the placing of the market of these products, because only products which is on the market after placed on the market after June 7 of 2020 is subject of this ban. So all products placed on the market before that sunset date, before July of 2020, is still legally to be on the market. So the inspection needs to check all the data, and we are following this issue.
Thank you very much. It's a nice example of cooperation between EU and non-EU, but well, although European, also in the European context. So for the next steps, the first, well, the upcoming activities. First, we wanted to tell you that we will send you next week, send all the network a message with a new communication channel. This will be through Teams. We have been checking with different communication channels, and although we are not big fans of Teams, it seems it's the app and the system that is working in more countries in the world. So we will send you an invite, and we will start organizing channels by topics. For example, we will have a channel on transparency on chemicals, and through this channel, you will be able to access all the information that we have shown today, and any further information that our speakers want to share, or any information that you want to share with the others. And then we, through the chat, we will start a conversation on how to continue working together on transparency on chemicals and products. The next webinar will be early February, and the topic would be children and chemicals, because this is the second topic of most interest to most of you. So we will address this. So we will have another channel only for this. We have been told that you don't have to download this Teams into your mobile phone or whatever, that it works very well in the mobile phone. So this is something that during the kickoff meeting we discussed, like we needed a communication channel that's it worked in mobile phones. So let's hope this works. If it doesn't work, we will just find a solution and change. And then we will organize the first project meeting in the first quarter of 2022. We still don't have a date, but we will be discussing potential dates with you and the agenda. We would like to build the agenda together with you, and through the Teams channel, we will start discussing this. So next week you will receive the invitation, and if you do not want to be in this channel, it's very easy. You just unsubscribe, because we will continue sending the invitation to the webinars through the email distribution list. So, well, just on time. I think it's 3:30 here in Spain, where I'm located. I wanted to thank you all very much. And well, if you want to show, turn on your camera, we can see each other. And well, looking forward to discussing with you through the Teams chat. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.